The humble nail, a small, thin piece of metal with a point at the end. They come in a variety of different shapes and sizes. Large ones, short ones, rusty ones, large heads, thin heads. There's a variety of nail types out there, and most of them are widely available at your local hardware store. Most of us take nails for granted. Nowadays, they are churned out by the thousands by big machines that do all the hard work for us. We just grab a box from the store and get hammering. But have you ever thought about how they are actually made? Or better still, have you ever wondered how they used to make nails many years ago? Well, let me enlighten you. This video is going to show you how a nail was traditionally made using a coal forge and good old-fashioned elbow grease. But before we get into the episode, I would like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers thousands of inspiring classes and tutorials for those looking to develop new skills and expand their creativity. Many people across the world are facing some form of lockdown or restrictions. Skillshare can be a great tool to help keep anxiety and boredom at bay. I recently finished an online course by Dale McManus, which focuses on iPhone photography and how to take professional photos on your iPhone. Often, when I'm out in the woods, I will see a great photo opportunity and try to take a picture. With little knowledge of skill of photography, I just pull out my iPhone and take the shot. More often than not, the shot will look washed out and I'll just delete it straight after. But having followed Dale's course, I now have a much better understanding of how to use my phone to take a professional level photograph. The course is short and informative, with tips on what settings to use for your camera, to shot composition, and then editing your photo afterwards straight from your phone. Dale makes it simple, and when I'm walking through the woods with a heavy pack on my back, simple is all I need. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, and after that, it's only around $10 a month. I recently took a trip to see Alex Pole, a professional blacksmith based in Somerset, England. Alex has been a blacksmith for over 30 years. He previously trained as a jeweller and a silversmith, before moving back into blacksmithing. Alex did some training in Sweden with Fredrik Tellen, who is a well-known teacher at Grantsford Brooks. Not only does Alex have a wealth of knowledge on the subject, but he is willing to share it with others and pass on the knowledge and skills of our forefathers. So, why do I want to learn how to forge a nail? Well, as many as you know, my YouTube channel focuses on the history of how our ancestors built their houses and shelters using just simple hand tools. Last year, I built an Anglo-Saxon inspired shelter with my father. It had a thatched roof and wattle and daub walls. We were pretty pleased with our build, but something wasn't quite right, and that was the door. So we are going to rebuild the door using nails that I am hoping to forge in this video. Before I even got hold of a hammer and started to hit some hot metal, I wanted to watch Alex forge a nail, just to take note of his technique and to learn the process step by step. So Alex fired up the coal forge and turned on the fan to get it up to optimum temperature for forging. When I entered Alex's workshop, aptly named The Forge, the first thing I noticed was how well organised all of his tools were. This was a man who cuts no corners, and he runs a very smooth operation in his workshop. I couldn't help but notice the different types of axes that Alex had collected over time, as well as some examples of ones that he had forged himself. Once the forge was fired up, Alex ran me through some of the basic principles of a forge. Blacksmithing and forging is not as simple as just putting a piece of metal into hot coals. He explained where the hottest point of the forge was, and where exactly to put the metal. If you put the metal in too deep and at an angle, you end up making the tip of the metal far too hot, and then the remaining section of metal having cold spots, which isn't ideal for forging. It was important to not push the metal through the centre of the coals, as it would push colder pieces of coal into the hottest part of the fire, and this would end up actually cooling the forge down. He then taught me about how to maintain the heat of the coal and to feed the fire regularly, and how to maintain a consistent temperature. Now for the tools. Alex uses a variety of different hammers in his forge. He showed me a few Swedish designs as well as London patterns. We would be working on a 55 kilo classic London pattern anvil that's roughly 70 years old. Alex likes to use a Swedish pattern cross-peen hammer, and I would be using a small 2-pound sledgehammer. Alex uses 8mm round stock for forging nails on his courses, as he says that you don't have to follow pre-existing patterns and contours that you would need to do with flat or square stock. The steel being used is mild steel, which is a fairly basic industrial steel. The forge itself will be reaching temperatures of between 850 to 1000 degrees Celsius. Now that the metal is hot enough to work with, Alex begins to draw out the metal and square off the corners of the nail. Once he has drawn it out into a point, he reheats it and makes a cut on the side of the metal. He then uses this weak point to bend the nail over into a small hook shape. Once at optimum temperature again, it's straight out of the forge and into the vise, at which point Alex snaps off the remaining stock and gets to work on forming the head of the nail by hammering down at 4 different angles. It's important to be fast at this stage, as the metal can quickly cool down due to the cold vise drawing the heat out from it. From a bird's eye perspective, you can clearly see the head of the nail and the 4 angles that Alex has put into it. This gives the nail head more rigidity when hitting it home with a hammer. Sounds simple enough, right? Now for my turn. It took me a while just to get into a rhythm of striking the hammer down at a consistent angle on the metal, but after some trial and a lot of error, I began to find my rhythm. What I found particularly tricky was maintaining the same angle of the hammer to create the square edges of the round stock. Whilst waiting for the metal to heat up again, Alex was explaining to me that traditional nail makers would have made up to 100 nails an hour. An average nail takes up to 100 strikes, and Alex said that he used to be able to make 250 nails in a day, which means that he was doing up to 25,000 hammer strikes a day. This is some serious work, and I can only imagine the hard work it must have been for professional nail makers back in the day. With this on my mind, it made me appreciate how efficient and hard working our forefathers were. I really felt a connection to the past, and this connection with traditional crafts and how our ancestors created things is what inspires me to create these videos today. Nowadays, the art of blacksmithing is quite heavily focused on axe and knife making, but my experience at Alex's forge really opened my eyes as to the underrated art of nail making and how much time and work goes into forging one. Once I had grasped the concept, I found myself engrossed in the process of this nail making. After an hour or so of forging, Alex wanted to show me another traditional way that nails were made, which is using a unique tool called a nail header. A nail header is essentially a square hole and a bit of hardened steel, and on the back it has a reverse taper. Alex explains that these are quite difficult to use compared to the more contemporary method that we were just using, but we wanted to show you how they are used. Due to the size of the nail header, Alex is going to use a slightly larger diameter stock. He heats it up in the forge just like we did with the other pieces of stock. Once it gets to optimum temperature, Alex begins to draw out the metal and turn the stock into a square shape. It then goes back in for another heat, and he begins work on drawing out the point of the nail. As with the other nails that we make, Alex makes a cut to the correct length that he wants. It goes in for one more heat, and then he slots it into the nail header and breaks off the remaining stock. And now he has to work fast on forming the head of the nail by slotting it into the nail header, placing it on the anvil and hammering it flat. It was interesting to see the 2 different processes of nail making. Perhaps the nail header method was slightly quicker, but it looked like it could easily go wrong. Once we had forged a few nails, it was time for us both to forge at the same time to try and get as many made in the time we had remaining. Being at the forge and learning this traditional skill from Alex was an incredible experience. His knowledge and experience in blacksmithing is vast, and to anyone who is interested in learning this craft, I highly recommend one of Alex's courses. I will put a link in the video description below. Alex also makes some fantastic forged kitchen cookware at his workshop, which he sells on his website. He has also just started up his YouTube channel with some brilliant high quality and educational videos. Head on over to his channel and hit the subscribe button. You won't regret it. I would also like to thank both Steve and Joe for sharing their knowledge and showing me around the workshop. Thanks also to Skillshare for sponsoring this episode. Don't forget, the first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare's premium membership. See you in the next video.